Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today we are continuing our Kink Fest interview series. And today we are speaking with DeGrey. And we're going to be talking about introversion, social stigma, primal play, a bunch of really interesting subjects. And yeah, so Rain, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience? Kind of talk a little bit about your history in BDSM and as an educator?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name is Rain DeGrey. I am a writer, educator, activist, and performer. I do the Dirty Talk advice column and the Dirty Talk podcast. My website is Rain DeGrey, and I can be found as Rain DeGrey on FetLife, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I have been an educator and performer and all around kinky pervert for a little over a decade now. And it was my love of knowledge and learning that caused me to become an educator. As someone who is super introverted, it's kind of surprising to me that I am so comfortable performing or on stage or teaching classes, but it really is a space that I feel very comfortable at. I'm really into learning knowledge, and I'm also really into sharing knowledge, and it became a natural fit for me to become an educator.
I'm also very introverted as well, which I think will probably surprise some people listening to this because I think, being people who perform or give talks online, people who are educators, I think there's an assumption that has to go along with being an extrovert. And I think there is something about BDSM and about the community maybe that makes it more comfortable an environment maybe as an introverted person, or at least in my case, to be able to do these things in a way that doesn't feel like it's conflicting with me being an introvert. And I would love to talk about that. So let's go ahead and get into that area in terms of introversion and BDSM. How do you see those two things going together?
I am not just a lifestyler and a kinkster, but I'm very and I'm not just here for the kink and the sexual exploration. I'm really curious about the history and the whys and wherefores. And I have noticed, I haven't done any scientific studies or research, but it seems to me that in general, for all that there are one or two shining star extroverts in the lifestyle, a fair amount of us are introverts. The analogy I use is that kinksters, we were theater geeks in high school. There were not a lot of us were really super successful, cheerleaders and football players. Like, we tended to be the people that were a little more artistic. We liked theater. We liked geeky, nerdy stuff. And there seems to be a huge crossover with people wired that way that ended up in the lifestyle. For a long time, I was really curious why I could be so comfortable on a stage in front of 350 people and it could be effortless. But if you took me off that stage and put me in the crowd of 350 people, I'd get a panic attack. I'd start to get sweaty. My breath would get short. I would feel dizzy and nauseous. And the aha moment for me is, I don't like to call myself a control freak. I prefer control enthusiast. And when I'm on stage or I'm doing a performance or I'm teaching a class, I'm utterly in control of that moment. And that's why I'm so comfortable being in front of 350 people. But if you take me off stage and put me in the crowd of people, I'm no longer in control. And that's where I start to feel panicked.
And how would that translate for just everyday people in the community, maybe who are introverted? Obviously, not all of us get the opportunity to be on a stage and control the situation in that way.
I'm actually really glad you asked that. As someone who is as introverted as I am and is as dedicated to being a kinkster as I am, when I first started entering the lifestyle, I realized that education and classes were crucial to me. And I actually have created a class called The Introvert's Guide to Kink. And it was hacks and workarounds I've come up with for the past decade as a way of dealing with my own very introverted tendencies. The biggest tip that I can possibly give my fellow introverts is this: we work best with a purpose. There's nothing more awkward than going to a play space or a party or an event and you don't know anyone and you're standing there awkwardly in a corner, dying, feeling uncomfortable. And a lot of play spaces, you're not even allowed to have your phone. You have nothing to hide behind. It's just you trying to make conversation that's so painful. Volunteer work. A community space is community and it needs multiple people to help run it. There's no better workaround for someone if you're new to the lifestyle or if you've been in it for 20 years, but you do suffer from introversion. Volunteer, be a door greeter. People are like, I don't know how to get to know anyone. By volunteering, not only do you get into a space for free, but your volunteer shift is not for the entire course of the play party or the event. Being the door greeter, and you say hi to every single person that comes by, be the cashier, take the tickets, do cleanup, set up the space. It's a really safe and natural way to interact with other people while having a purpose. And in doing that, you're going to find that conversations are going to start to flow. You're going to have something to talk about. It's much better to volunteer for an event than to just buy a ticket, show up, not know anyone, think something's going to happen. You don't have anyone to talk to. You're miserable the whole time. You go home. This sucks. The lifestyle's not for me. No one's friendly. If you can't do volunteer work, a second workaround that I really, truly believe in is we're so lucky to have the internet. Back in the day, when you were kinky, you would write, the people would do personals on the back of newspapers. You'd write some stranger a letter. You couldn't vet them. You knew nothing about them. You'd send it to a PO box. People would exchange photos, and you'd like meet in person and hope they're not a serial killer. We have the internet, and we are so lucky. Find a discussion group. Don't just go charging into someone's, box with a PM, you don't know them at all. Hey, no. Find a natural discussion group and allow people online to start to get to know you. Don't go thrusting in fetish first. These are the things that are important to me. No, treat other people like fellow humans. And if you're on say you're really into spanking, as opposed to just PMing people, you have a great ass, I'd like to spank you. You're not going to get anywhere with that. Start talking about techniques. Allow people to see the human as a whole. And they're like, oh, I know that person from that discussion group. And when you see them in real life at an event space, oh, hey, it's great to finally put a face to the name. We've been talking for the past couple of months. I swear to God, those two tips are the tips that I used to help me get out of the house and meet my fellow kinksters. You don't need to be on a stage. Volunteer work and staying out of people's inboxes unless they invite you, and getting to know people on a discussion board. So when you finally meet them in person, you already have a common base of having gotten to know them for a couple months or however long it takes.
I think that's all really fantastic advice. And I also advocate for volunteering and for going to events with a plan. If you do decide to go out to events, that can be really helpful. In terms of volunteer work, it also doesn't have to be just being a greeter at the door or doing setup or tear down. There are lots of little everyday things that organizations, especially places that own their own venues or rent places, need help with. So if you have maybe an artistic skill set, maybe you're a painter or a carpenter, a plumber, an electrician, somebody that has a trade or some kind of art, you might be able to contribute in that way as well, making sure the space is beautiful and has furniture and stays up and running. The online community is great, FetLife is great, and depending on where you live, you may have more options for socialization besides just going to dungeons. At least here, it's not very frequent, but there are places that host introvert or geek specific munches, and those are fantastic. And if you do have one, or just be on the lookout for them as well, because instantly you are in a room of other people that have kind of the same frame of mind as you do when it comes to being a fellow introvert, or perhaps sharing the same hobbies that you do, other interests outside of BDSM. And kind of goes along those same lines of not just charging in with a DM that says, hey, you have a great ass, I'd like to spank it. Have those other moments of connection that don't necessarily need to be kink related. And that can be a little bit easier to talk about if you do connect on those other levels.
Agreed. One of the very common pieces of advice that's given to newbies is just go to a munch. Just go to a munch. And I certainly believe in munches in principle, and I know that they can be very useful. I'm introverted enough that I found munches challenging unless I had someone to go with me and talk to me. And I'm in no way discounting munches because I think that introversion is on a sliding scale. And whenever I see someone online whining, and they do whine, I can't find anyone, I can't find my community. And really, it seems that what they're hoping is that the heavens will part and their perfect partner will land in their lap with a bow on their forehead. And they're not willing to go in and do the work. And if you're not willing to do the work, you don't get the payoff. And I do believe in how beneficial munches are. I just know that for myself, I found them challenging. Trying to do small talk, if I felt like I didn't know anyone, showing up to a munch was terrifying for me. And maybe other people had more success with munches. I definitely focused more on the volunteer work because I'm the type of person that really does best with an activity and a purpose. Just sitting there trying to talk to someone doesn't work for me. But if I have an activity, I feel much more at peace.
I'm very much that same way as well. And I have had experiences at munches that are completely across the spectrum from each other. I have been to munches that are in a poorly lit bar with 50 people in a space that's probably meant to hold half that many. And that's not good. Not good at all.
I could
No, I learned very
no.
quickly.
That
Yeah, it's
sounds
like,
like
thanks
hell.
for inviting me. I'm not going to be coming back. And then I've been to other munches that are, and around here we have so many people. We actually have pre-munches, and those have 10 people, and we're all eating cupcakes and playing a board game, or there's some kind of lead person there who's actually facilitating a specific discussion. So it's more focused and more it's more structured in a way that might be helpful for some people, but it does vary so much place to place, community to community. And if that for some reason does not work for you and a munch doesn't work with your brain, that is totally okay. And that's one of the great things about the kink community is you do have variety and options and ways to meet people in a style that works for you.
There is a great variety in how munches are. And I personally am not a big fan of mixing kink and alcohol. And I know some people are like, oh, I need to have a drink or two so I can relax and loosen up in order to do these kinky things. And I certainly don't want to shame anyone for that, but that's not something that works for me. I wouldn't do a munch in a bar. There's a munch in the area where I live where, I'm referencing what you said in terms of a structured activity. There's a munch that's a large panel discussion, and the munch is held once a month, and every month there's a topic, and everyone in the munch gets around in a giant circle, and a lot of people show up, and then the whole munch is the discussing of whatever that month's topic is. And of course, there's a break halfway through and you can go get food, and then that's where people socialize. But if I do find myself doing munches, it's much more munches that are more structured with an activity as opposed to a bunch of people packed in a bar trying to make small talk. That doesn't work quite as well for me.
Something you mentioned earlier was the partner falling onto the person's lap with a bow on their head. And I think that's something that a lot of people who are introverted maybe struggle with is, okay, I've volunteered, I've gone to the introvert munch, I've gone to the geek trivia night. How do I actually approach somebody for play that I'm interested in?
So the thing is, that's basically an impossible question to answer because there are so many variables and it shifts wildly from person to person. And the biggest takeaway that I have is I get a lot of, not that women don't contact me, but I get a lot of frustrated men that contact me that are looking for partners. And the universal theme seems to be, why haven't I found that person? And behind that, unfortunately, I very often pick up a sense of entitlement. They aren't willing to do the work. They aren't willing to put in the effort. And it harkens back, in my mind, to a bit of toxic masculinity. The way that our society is set up is that men are sold this bill of goods that if they are a man, they're entitled to hot bikini models. You look at any ad, look at any commercial, look at any movie. It's a goofy, dorky guy, and he always lands an incredibly hot chick. Well, that's a toxic concept to pitch to men, because if their entire life, from the moment they could watch TV or look at a magazine or see a commercial or watch a movie, it's always the man's going to get the girl and she's going to be stunning and there's not going to be a lot of effort on his part, then these men get out in the real world and they get frustrated. They get on FetLife and they're like, this should be a shopping center and I should just click on the profile I want and the hot chick will fall in my lap. 99% of dates are a failure. 99%, because you keep going on first dates until one works. It's a fallacy to think that because we happen to have kink in common, that we're all going to be best buddies and we're going to have this huge sense of community and this camaraderie and we're all going to get along. We're not. I go on a lot of first dates. I don't go on a lot of second dates. And you have to be okay with rejection. You have to be, I have not forgotten any of the times I've been rejected, and I've been rejected a lot. And of course it's painful. And your options are either to dust yourself off and try again, or to give up and go home. And sitting at home by yourself, miserable, wondering why you're not getting the fun you feel you should be having, is a recipe for bitterness and resentment. And the more bitter and resentful you get, the more you poison your whole demeanor, and then the less successful you become. And the less successful you become, the more bitter and resentful you get. And the more bitter, it becomes a vicious cycle. When I referenced earlier about these discussion groups, a very common mistake that people make is, I have a fetish. Okay, let's say I want to be pegged. And that's all they can think about. And they're like, okay, I'm in the kinky community. Where can I find someone to do this thing to me? They don't take the time to get to know the person as a whole. They're looking for someone that can provide them their fetish. And they're walking around thrusting their fetish at everyone. Give me this thing. Give me this thing. Of course, they're going to have low success rates. Of course, they're going to be frustrated. I really believe in community. I really believe in doing the legwork of getting to know people online first. It's such a valuable tool. You start talking with people, you start having discussions. If you're just walking up to someone cold, hey, let's go do a thing. You want to do a thing with me? I'm letting you know mathematically your odds are low that that's going to have a success rate. And then you go home and you're like, that play party was a waste. No one's friendly. I wasted my money for a ticket. I drove there. It was cold and dark. This is bullshit. Why am I even bothering? If you're not taking the time to get to know someone as a whole, if you just like walk up to someone, hey, you're hot, can I tie you up? It's not going to be as successful as you think. I like to find natural and organic ways for a discussion to unfold. And I'm not talking about like talking about the weather. And I'm not talking about being the type of person who lurks on the side of a conversation. If you see a group of people, here's the thing. Body language is the universal language all humans have. It's what babies know. Before we start speaking French or German or English, we all learn body language. And if you're at a play party and people are not opening up to you, if they're turning their shoulder away, if they're not making eye contact, their body language is saying, I'm not interested in engaging with you. And you have to respect that. And the more that you lurk on the side of a conversation and try and force your way in and make some comment, yeah, how about that game last night? And people don't know what you're not reading their body language and you're trying to force an interaction. Whereas if someone's showing a toy and you're able to say, oh, that's a really cool toy. Where did you get it? Tell me about the toy. I might like to get one myself. And finding more effortless and fluid ways as opposed to try and force yourself in a conversation or force a play situation. But as I stated originally, there's no one size fits all. There are way too many variables for your headspace, how you're presenting to others, the energy you're giving off, whether or not you're reading body language. And I can't give a universal answer that would work for all introverts that would allow them to flow into a conversation. The best piece of advice that I can give anyone is get to know yourself, because we don't do that. You're stuck being you for the rest of your life. You might as well sit down and get to know yourself. You're not like a car. You can't trade in for a new model when you get bored. This is who you're going to be for the rest of your life. You might as well take the time to get to know who you are and how you tick. And the more time you take to get to know yourself, I 100% guarantee you the easier it's going to be to interact with other humans.
One of the other things that might be helpful for people is taking the time to learn body language, because I don't think, even though it is a universal language, a lot of people don't spend enough time actually observing it and learning to recognize it and listen to it. Because I have definitely seen interactions in dungeons where one person is giving every single that they possibly can. They don't want to be in a conversation with this person, and the other person is just charging forward, and they're totally unaware that the other party is even uncomfortable, or maybe they're purposely maybe ignoring the signals because they want an excuse to continue the conversation, I guess, although I hope that's not the case. And learning yourself, learning body language, and like you mentioned towards the beginning, treating everybody as people and as humans and as whole individuals is really important, and not treating everyone you interact with as a potential fetish service provider is really important. Or on the bottom side, what happens a lot as well is in rope bondage, a lot of times young or inexperienced bottoms will come up and they'll just rush up to whoever has like the prettiest profile picture or the best art and, oh, please tie me up, even though they haven't even had a conversation yet. And no matter what side of this lash you're on, at the end of the day, you have to remember that everybody has a basic level of autonomy you need to respect, and remembering that, and remembering that everybody has their own individual needs, wants, limits, boundaries, etc. for a relationship or for any kind of interaction is really important.
Yet no rigger wants to feel like they're an amusement park ride and people don't give a fuck about them and are just queuing up to take the ride. When you referenced body language, I want to get back to that because that's a really, really important point. Body language is crucial for any play scene. And I find myself very wary and very uncomfortable with people that cannot understand body language. In order for a scene to be successful, body language is crucial. I'm going to say that again because that's how important this point is. In order for a scene to be successful, reading body language is crucial. Very often people get nonverbal. So much of what, and of course you can do a safe word and you can do prearranged signals, but so much of what happens in a scene, even if you do use words, by far the majority of the communication that's flowing is body language. If you're the bottom, you're communicating the journey you're going on. As a top, your job is to read that journey, is to push them just far enough, but not too far, is to know when to ramp it up, is to know when to take it down, is to know when the scene's supposed to end. None of that is possible without reading body language. And if you are not understanding people's body language, if you're not communicating well with them, if you're not reading them at all, nobody's going to want to play with you. The most important skill that any kinkster should have, if this is something they want to pursue, is being incredibly fluent with body language.
I've heard the stories of how on the extreme end that this can go really wrongly is somebody will basically just use, oh, but they didn't safe word as an excuse when every signal that their body was giving out the entire time during the scene was stop. And maybe they went nonverbal and they hadn't negotiated for a nonverbal safe word. And it's something where, you know, having more tools in your toolkit for having a successful scene, for being able to communicate with your partner in a successful and as complete way as possible is always a good thing. Like people who have, something on the autism spectrum, for example, they're definitely in the BDSM community, but they might need to take a little bit extra time to learn those things about body language that they maybe don't naturally click with. But there are resources, I'm assuming, for being able to learn about body language, or is this just something you kind of have to intuit and focus on and kind of emphasize on your own?
Oh, no, absolutely not. YouTube is an incredibly valuable resource. And as someone who teaches rough play and femdom classes, I really, really believe in body language. As someone who is a top, who is taking people on that journey, I wasn't going to just automatically assume that I would know how to read people. I took the time to educate myself. There's a huge section of YouTube that is all about reading body language. And when I was starting my kinky journey, I kind of inadvertently got into body language of presidential candidates. And there is this clip of Richard Nixon saying that he wasn't a criminal and he didn't do anything wrong and he wasn't a lawbreaker. And it was a very interesting angle because the camera was from the side, so you could see, and he had his hands behind his back, and he was stroking his thumb with his finger. And they had someone who was a psychologist and a body language expert that was breaking this down, and they said this is a self-soothing gesture that people that are under stress or are lying do to comfort themselves. And that was where I inadvertently stumbled into the rabbit hole of body language. I started looking at politicians' handshakes. And there's actually, now that I'm mentioning it, anyone that's listening to it, you should look and see when you have two alpha males and they go to shake hands, someone's hand is going to be on top. All political figures, all movie stars, anyone that's in the public eye is actually coached on how to present themselves with body language. And you'll see two presidents of two countries, and they're competing to see who can get the hand on top when they do a handshake. And I found that fascinating. And when I started researching body language, just for my own interest and education, I quickly saw how it could be applied to the lifestyle and applied to play scenes. There are books, there are classes, there are videos. Yeah, by all means, educate yourself. And if you don't feel, particularly if you're on the spectrum, I myself am on the spectrum. I have Asperger's. It's mild, could be worse, but I do lack some emotional empathy. I get very hyper focused on things. I tend to isolate. I'm really comfortable in my own company. And I've found workarounds for my own limitations. And one of them is education. And one of them is, okay, I want to be the best top or play partner I can be. Let me get the knowledge. Let me learn what people are communicating. And all the knowledge is out there. It's on you to take the time and effort to go and acquire it. But we hold the entirety of mankind's knowledge in our hands every time we pick up a phone. It's out there. You just need to be willing to take the effort to learn. And that's where people get blocked. They're like, oh, this is so hard. Why isn't it easier? And they're not willing to put in the effort. And then they get frustrated that they're not getting the awesome experiences they think they're entitled to.
It seems like it should be so easy because, hey, I made a FetLife profile and I filled it out and I have a picture. Why aren't people talking to me? You do have to put a little bit more effort than that. Even though it is out there, you have to sometimes still go looking for it.
This is important. Absolutely nothing in life is easy. And you are setting yourself up for bitterness and disappointment if you think anything's going to be easy. And I see that not just in kink, but all over where people are like, why don't I get all the things with no effort? And you're doing self-sabotage. If you're not willing to put in the effort, you don't get the reward. One doesn't go without the other. And that's a huge issue that people have, that they don't put in the effort and then they get frustrated and then they get angry. And then you see them on FetLife ranting, this isn't working. I'm quitting this site. People are so mean. No one's friendly. No one talks to me. Whoa, with an attitude like that, are you meeting anyone halfway? You're not. You're sitting there being bitter and then you're wondering why you aren't getting what you want.
It's one of those things that besides just in BDSM or in kink life, that is an attitude that seems to be very prevalent in a lot of spaces where, if you don't just immediately find what you want, oh, well, this isn't working. This isn't what I thought it was going to be. I've been misled. And even though you haven't really necessarily put in the work yet, or even questioning what about you might need to change or be addressed or be thought about more in order to go into a space. And I think sometimes there's a little bit of a lack of self-awareness. And if you are going into spaces with aggression, entitlement, that can be really off-putting for a lot of people. And it doesn't matter what side of the slash you're on. People are just not going to want to interact with you because that raises a lot of red flags just on a surface level, even trying to be friends way, not even necessarily going into play territory.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
So one of the other things that I wanted to touch on also today in our conversation was social stigma. And I think this might even be a little bit attached to some of the things that we've touched on earlier, where in vanilla society, obviously, for the most part, kinks, BDSM lifestyle, and so on are not acceptable. You can't really talk about them. It's very much a dark area. And then when you go into the BDSM community, there's this expectation, I think, sometimes that you can just be totally open all the time with everybody and everybody's going to be totally accepting, when I think maybe there's still boundaries when it comes to how you talk about your kink and how you talk about BDSM with other people that maybe you don't really know yet. And what I want to talk about is how to, of course, become comfortable with yourself and become comfortable with your kinks, but also learning how to talk about it with other people in a way that is healthy and isn't going to necessarily lead to disappointment.
I call that newbie frenzy. And I was certainly guilty of newbie frenzy myself, because for many people, the analogy that I always give is that there is a certain percentage of the human population that is born kinky. That is the wiring we have. We can no more shift it than if we were transgender or gay or bi. Our wiring leads towards kinky. And we can deny it. We can suppress it. We can think that society's going to judge us. We can keep that part of ourselves in the closet, but it isn't going to go away. And if you have been ignoring this wiring and not addressing it, and you finally step out of the closet and get into the lifestyle, it can be so thrilling. It's like the clouds have parted, angels are singing, sunlight is on your skin for the first time, and we get so excited. The comparison I always use is that being kinky is the exact same thing as being a born-again Christian. All of a sudden, there's a pep in the step, there's a light in your eyes, you're wearing new clothing, more modest, more leather. You're going to church every Sunday morning. You're going to the dungeon every Sunday night, every Saturday night. You can't stop talking about this amazing, you carry your Bible everywhere, you carry your flogger everywhere. It's the zeal that people can have when they find that thing, that aha moment that they've been struggling with their whole life. It can completely make someone feel reborn. And in doing so, they can lose their sense of boundaries and respect for others. And newbie frenzy, I had it. I was raised by hippies, so I already was very we didn't have a lot of boundaries. Not like the hippies were sexual, but it was just a lot of massages and hugs and let's talk about our feelings. And for me to then get in the lifestyle, I was very touchy. I was very enthusiastic. I was bounding over every dungeon I could find like a puppy in heat, because I was like, oh, these are my people. And when the newbie frenzy starts to wear off, when you start stepping over other people's boundaries, when you start offending people, when people don't want to be touched or interacted with. And I mean, I would present, I guess you could say, as a height, weight, proportionate white female, which you would think I would historically, people are like, okay, you've got more privilege, you can do whatever you want. No, even as a skinny, busty, open-minded, kinky female bounding around a dungeon, yay, kink. People were like, whoa, slow your roll, like chill out. Treat people as humans. If the only thing you're interacting with some other person is just the fetish and nothing else, no one wants to feel like a fetish delivery system. Male, female, top, bottom, dominant, submissive, you need to relate to someone as a whole. And if the only thing you're attempting to engage with them is just the fetish, you're not going to have a high success rate.
I think sometimes people who are doing this bounding through the dungeon, interacting with everybody, and maybe not necessarily respecting boundaries, sometimes that can kind of resemble the rejection they may have experienced in the vanilla world. And they're going, oh, why doesn't anybody here accept me? I thought this was supposed to be a really accepting space, and here I am, and all these people are telling me that I can't do what I want to do. Do you have any advice for overcoming that, or maybe changing the frame of mind so that way you don't end up accidentally having these experiences? And I know to some degree having newbie frenzy, sub frenzy, top frenzy, whatever you want to call it, is unavoidable just because kink is really exciting and it can be a very reawakening experience to discover it. But I think there are probably still ways that you can combat it and at least maybe shorten its duration.
I don't mean to sound harsh here, but it goes back to entitlement. And I'm on FetLife daily. And it's not just men, women do it too, but they're whining, they're bitter, they're miserable, they're angry, and they're like, I thought this was supposed to be an accepting community, and you aren't accepting. And it's like, no, what's the common denominator? The common denominator is you. And if you don't like the feedback that the world around you is giving, it's not that the world around you is full of assholes. You are the common denominator in this situation. It is entitled and it is egotistical to believe that because you've joined the kink community, every single person in that community is going to be your best friend and play with you. And I want to answer your question, but what's the advice? Don't be an entitled, egotistical asshole that feels that people around you owe you play and attention.
Mm-hmm.
I want to sugarcoat that, not to offend people, but that's what's going on, is that I'm now kinky, I'm in this atmosphere, and these people owe me interaction and play. Mm-hmm. Why aren't they giving it to me? Well, that's a really unappealing attitude. And if that's the attitude you're putting out, you're not going to get a lot of takers. And then you find yourself resentful and you're like, but what's going on? And then they start griping. And whenever on FetLife, 99.9% of the time, when I see someone being called out for inappropriate behavior or actions or words, they don't hear what's being said to them. They defensively back in a corner and say, but you're supposed to be accepting, and why is this so judgmental? I thought you were supposed to be my people. The best piece of advice I could give you is listen to what people around you are telling you, as opposed to getting defensive and resentful and being frustrated that you're not getting what you want. Listen to the feedback, because the feedback's not coming out of a void. If you're not getting what you want, change your actions.
I definitely know people in my community who, when they first started, when they were 18, 21, whatever it was, that came in with this very, I wouldn't necessarily say entitled, I would say maybe more like fuckboy or fuckgirl type behavior in the community. And it took until they opened up and listened to people's feedback about, here's why people aren't wanting to interact with you. Here's what you're doing wrong. And then when they actually internalized that and processed and said, hey, I want to change, that was when they started becoming a positive member of the community that people wanted to interact with, that, were able to have success finding play partners and just generally, being somebody who was a positive contribution to those around them. And it is a really difficult thing to learn how to do, because I don't think a lot of us are given the skill set at a young age to listen to criticism and listen to feedback in a way that isn't just automatically defensive. But there are ways that you can work on this. There are lots of non-kink specific workbooks that you can look at. There are resources online because this is such a common issue. And I think for people who are listening to this who are maybe struggling with having success in the community and they've gone through the checklist of I made a FetLife account, I went to a Munch, I went to a dungeon, I complimented somebody, what am I doing wrong? Maybe having a little bit more of a retrospective on your behavior can be a tool that you can use. Something else that I wanted to discuss in terms of social stigma is beyond just feeling accepted within the community is I think on the other side of this, people also struggle with feeling comfortable and confident enough to bring up their kink sometimes. Like it's almost like there's two extremes to this. There's one person who finds kink and wants everybody to know what it is, and there's one person who joins the community but still feels a lot of shame or a lot of guilt even maybe about their particular kinks, because I think there are some aspects of BDSM that a lot of people can still be very kink shamey about or be less accepting of. So, for example, things involving like age play, DDLG, some forms of pet play, or some forms of sexual play. And people still feel like, I don't really know how to actually like be confident and talk to people about the things that I'm into because I'm afraid that they'll judge me and reject me for the things that I'm interested in.
I would recommend doing what I do, which is to drop all the fucks. Here's the thing. We are carrying white-knuckled in our hands all of these fucks. We're carrying the fucks of fear and guilt and shame, and we don't need to be carrying them. And one day I looked down at my white-knuckled fist and I said, I've picked up all of these fucks and they're not doing me any good. And I opened up my hands and I dropped the fucks. And here's the thing. Those fucks are sneaky. They're going to creep back up in your hand and you're going to look and you're going to be like, I picked up the fucks again. But the more that you make a conscious effort of dropping those fucks, the easier it will become. I'm not saying walk out in the streets wearing nothing but a banana hammock and puppy ears and a jeweled butt plug. No, that's shoving things in people's faces that haven't consented. But what I am counseling is be your real, true, and authentic self with no apologies. And in doing so, you will find yourself surrounded by a group of people that accept you. And if people can't accept you, did you ever want them in your circle to begin with? It is a fallacy, and indeed it is egotistical to think that people are walking around judging you. I used to walk down the street and I thought, I've got bird shit in my hair, spinach in my teeth, my outfit sucks, no one likes my shoes. And I was investing so much time and energy in believing that people around me were judging me. They're not. They're not judging you. People are way too busy living their own lives to take their head out of their own ass to ever even have the time to pass judgment on you. And when you realize that, you're free. And I personally I don't have enough spoons to invest in worrying that people are going to judge me for who I am and my proclivities, because those aren't the type of people that I want in my life. The more clear and honest and direct you are about your needs and desires, the higher the chance you have of getting those needs and desires met. If you're walking around with, this is a shameful kink and people are someone out on this planet is into the same thing as you. It's guaranteed. Maybe there's only 10 people on the planet that like being dressed up as a giant bunny rabbit while being sodomized by a carrot, but they're out there. You're not the only one. It's on you to put forth the effort and the energy to find those people that have the same proclivity as you do. But it is an utter waste of your time to unnecessarily burden yourself with the baggage of being worried about other people judging you. Our time is so valuable. Time is the most valuable and precious commodity you will ever be given on this planet. And every day that you wake up, you have one less day. And how you choose to invest that commodity and currency counts for everything in your life. And I refuse to invest my precious time in being worried about other people judging me. I won't do it. My time's too valuable. And only you can choose to drop those fucks. It doesn't matter what I say to you. It doesn't matter how much I counsel you or coach you. You can either choose to drop the fucks and be your honest and true self, or you can choose to be all anxious and neurotic and worked up over your proclivities, but you're not doing yourself any favors.
I totally agree with all of that, and I know it's not an overnight thing, and I think it's something that people want to be an overnight thing. They want to just be able to stop caring what other people think. But every journey has a first step, right? And if you can just start with the mindset of like, I'm not going to let my fear of other people judging me get in the way of the things that I want in life. That is a really great way to get started on that journey of being able to say, I'm not going to give any fucks what other people think about me, because you, like you said, we do have limited time on this planet. And the more of it that you spend worrying that everybody thinks that your kink or your interest is gross, that's less time that you have to find people who don't think that. And it's more, I think, maybe also, I think there's some degree of this that is being locked in a negative mindset of thinking everybody's judging me, nobody likes me, everybody thinks this thing that I like is gross. If you try and transition maybe to more positive outlook, or at least not being so wrapped up in the negativity, that can also be really beneficial as well. And if you ever need a reminder that other people are into the same shit as you are, just look at your kink list on FetLife and see how many people have the same fetishes on their list as you do. I guarantee that even if it's a really weird one, you're probably not the first one to have thought of it or the first one to have it on their profile.
100%. To circle it back to body language, when you talked about the negative mindset, we get back what we put out. And as someone who is an anxious and introverted and neurotic person who has a hard time reading people and gets easily flustered and doesn't do well in social settings and suffers from panic attacks in crowds, that's all stuff I've taken the time to sit down and get to know myself. Those are my liabilities. Those are the issues I have to deal with. But if what I'm putting forth is this air of neurotic, anxious, high-strung, fearful, you're going to judge me, no one likes me, if that's the energy I'm putting out, what do you think it is going to be that I'm going to be getting back? I know it's so easy to say and it's so hard to do. I so get it. I suffer from depression. I'm very introverted. Everything that I'm giving, like, I don't mean it to sound like harsh love, but it all comes back to you and what choices you're willing to make. And if you're sitting there, oh, no one likes me and everyone's judging me and I'm a weird pervert and a freak, that's what you're putting out. It's really hard for people to respond to that energy positively. And when you get trapped in the cycle, and the more you're like, well, people aren't responding well to me, and you put out more neurotic, miserable, unhappy energy, you just go down that spiral. And there's no person on the planet, I don't care what therapy, I don't care what coaching, only you can make that choice to change that cycle. And you can't force it. You're going to be ready when you're going to be ready. But I see people that they get frustrated. When they get frustrated, they get really negative and they start, no one likes me. This site is bullshit. The community is bullshit. The lifestyle's not full of people. They're supposed to be friendly and accepting. They're not. This sucks. Well, yeah, if that's what you're putting out, you can't be surprised that people are not responding to that positively. And there is a certain truism in fake it till you make it. Even if you are uncomfortable, even if you do feel that you're being judged, try putting forth positive, non-neurotic, more relaxed energy, and that's when you're going to get back. And the more you take that cycle, the easier it's going to be. The more you respond with a relaxed vibe towards others, the more they're going to give it back to you.
Switching gears a little bit, let's talk about rough body play, rough play, and primal play. And I specifically want to focus on primal play. And those of you who are listening who have been on my channel before, I have gotten possibly dozens of requests to cover this subject, and I am really excited to get into it. So I would love to hear what your perspective is on what primal play is, just to start off with.
I'm a very open-minded and curious kinkster. I am a polypansexual sadomasochistic switch who is a strap-on service top with service submissive tendencies. Basically, it means I'm greedy. I'm like the Baskin Robbins of ice cream. I want all the flavors to my face hole now. And I have often theorized that possibly because I'm on the spectrum and I have Asperger's, that the level of stimulation that I personally need for something to register seems to me to be at a higher level than a lot of other people I interact with. It's like the radio dials in my head. I had an ex-daddy who told me, Rain, you only have ones and 11s. And there's a whole, there's 4, 5, 6s, and 7s, and you're never doing that because you're always at 11. Certainly for me, when I started getting into rough and primal play, I need more edge play. I need more extreme stuff for it to really register for the wiring in my head. And rough and primal play for me is actually, in my humble opinion, some of the most trickiest edge play out there. Because if you were to look at a rough and primal play scene, it looks from the outside, if you didn't know what was going on, it could look like two wildcats just going at it and screams and flailing limbs, and you're like, this is out of control. It's not. That is the secret. It's like really sweaty chess. There's such strategy and thought and deliberation into what's going on. And you might not be able to tell it from the outside. It might look like people don't know what they're doing. But the reason that there isn't more injuries in rough and primal play is that the people that are engaging in such play actually have put a lot of time and homework and effort. One of the biggest tips that I give if you want to get into rough and primal play is learn some jiu-jitsu, learn some grappling, get a working idea of how the human body works and how anatomy works. That's good for anyone that wants to be a kinkster, but 10 times more so if you want to do primal play. It's less structured. There isn't this formal DS and I'm kneeling and I'm taking a collar and yes, master, I'm shining your boots. And that is a specific style of play, and that certainly works for some people. I've never really done well with labels. I'm not really good at the DS stuff. I'm not really good at rituals and routines and protocol, and more power to the people that can. I'm much more free-flowing and natural and organic when it comes to my play. And rough play and primal play was a natural fit for me as a result.
I like to think of primal play and like rough body play as controlled chaos, because there is still typically that negotiation and that boundary setting that happens before the scene. And then once you get into it, you are relying on those skills that you're taking into the scene. Like maybe if judo, aikido, jujitsu, even just knowing like the locations of like pressure points on the body, any sort of information you take into the scene, that's going to impact how well it's going to flow. And I would want to know, is there like a specific headspace that you go into when it's primal play? Like I know a lot of people describe it as animalistic. Does it always have to be that way, or does it kind of depend?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, and I am wary of, yes, animalistic, but here's the thing. Let's go back to the phrase you used, controlled chaos. And I really want to accent the word controlled, because if it's not controlled, it's just chaos. There's a beautiful headspace in being primal and animalistic, but it is my firm belief that you need to be 10 times more cautious than you would be with any other play scene. And everything that I'm doing, no matter how chaotic it might look from the outside, is controlled. You're never wrestling at 100%. You're giving it 50. You're not doing takedown and abduction scenes. If you're fully abandoning yourself to the absolute primal animal mindset, in my opinion, you are opening yourself up to a significantly higher chance of things going wrong, of injuries, of miscommunications. And as animalistic and abandoned as primal play might look to an observer from the outside, if you're not really strongly exercising the control aspect of it, people are going to get hurt. You're going to have broken fingers. You're going to have a concussion. You're going to have a black eye you didn't intend to cause. It has to be controlled. If it's not controlled, it becomes way too chaotic and in my mind, way too risky. I don't know how other people do it. How I do it is that there's actually a lot more thought and effort and planning that would go into a primal scene versus a bondage scene or a flogging scene. I think that primal play takes more effort and more consideration, and you have to be, for me, there's a huge reward and payoff with it that I find very appealing, but it's certainly not anything that I would ever counsel for anyone to go into without a lot of homework and research and communication and really knowing what you're doing.
Maybe there's a misconception again looking at it from the outside that like, oh, I don't have to like negotiate this. This is like super unstructured. It doesn't have all of those like rule things that I hate so much. And I think sometimes people maybe get the misunderstanding that primal means anything goes when it sounds like that's not really the case.
No, not at all. That's not the case. And I don't do well with rules. I got asked not to come back to Master's Den at the Citadel because I wasn't good at being a female submissive that took orders. Like, that's not my thing. But despite the fact that like a rigid DS, 24/7 total power exchange lifestyle is not for me, and rough and primal play is what works much better for me, that doesn't mean that there isn't. It's a matter of what you're playing with is risky, and therein lies the appeal. But everyone goes onto the roller coaster and they want the fun of the thrilling dips. No one wants the roller coaster to go off the rails. Do roller coasters occasionally go off the rails? They do. But every time you get on the roller coaster, you're like, I hope I get the thrill and the fun, and I don't end up with a concussion with the roller coaster having pitched into the nearest tree. So yes, there is a huge amount of structure, but once you have an idea of what the structure is, once you're aware of how to do primal play, you can just go for it and have a ton of fun and get crazy with it. But here's an example I really like to use. If you look at Picasso's work and you look at the cubism and you're like, this guy, he's just putting colors on canvas and this is crazy, it's chaotic. You could say it's rough and primal. If you look back at the work that Picasso was doing when he was 15, he was such a good painter. At 15, he was painting paintings that looked like they were photos. He first learned all the rules. He was an incredibly skilled painter. And once he learned all the rules, then he chucked them out. It's the exact same thing with primal play. You don't get to do the rough and primal play that looks chaotic and full of abandon until you've mastered the rules. And once you've mastered them, then you can adapt them to a style that works for you and your partner.
So to kind of extend the art analogy a little bit, it's once you know how to implement things like color, line, pattern, then you can deconstruct it in a way to make it seem like you're using elements that are more chaotic. And what I'd be interested in hearing are what are some of the things structure-wise that you should keep in mind for primal play?
Okay. One of the biggest things that people do when it comes to takedown scenes or wrestling scenes or abduction scenes is people really get into the heat of the moment because you have the adrenaline flowing. You're in that primal headspace, and people either attack or fight back at 100%. Do not You are essentially guaranteeing that there's going to be an injury or a miscommunication of some sort. No matter how hardcore you're going, it's supposed to be play. We're doing a scene. It's play. Even if you're doing this bag over the head and you're dragging them and throwing them in the trunk of the car and taking them out into the woods and violently fucking them up the ass, you're not doing it at 100%. You are deliberately dialing it back. So you still have the energy and the excitement and the adrenaline, but don't ever go at someone 100% and don't ever fight back 100%. The other thing too, it's easy for this to get, lost in the heat of the moment. No scene should happen without there being some sort of sign. Even say you can't go, you go nonverbal. Say you're gagged. Say you have a mouthful of pillow and you're being taken from behind. There has to be some sort of sign that has to be respected. 2 fingers tapping on a shoulder, a couple grunts, that this isn't working. At any point, you need to be able to tap out when things get too heated. I also, even if I'm doing a rough and primal scene, to hearken it back to body language, I'm always taking the time, no matter how primal my headspace is, no matter how animalistic I'm feeling, I'm not fully letting myself go. You have to keep part of yourself in check. I'm always reading the body language. I'm always paying attention to their eyes. Are they sweating? Are they tense? Am I pulling something too tight? Are we wrestling and we're getting too near a brick or a pillar that could, injure their heads? You have to be completely aware of your environment. And if you just go full animalistic and I'm just going to take someone down, you're essentially guaranteeing that injuries are going to happen.
Do you have any advice for how to make sure you don't accidentally go fully into the headspace to a place you can't easily come back from? Or like any tools that you use?
And the thing is, because I can't go in anyone else's head, all I can do is say what I do, which is don't. And if you find yourself, if you cannot hold yourself back, if you're going too far, if you are unable to keep yourself in check and you go too far, then rough play is not right for you. I'm sorry, flat out, 100%. If someone's like, oh, I couldn't help it, like we went too far, but we were in primal headspace. Golly gee shucks willikers, sorry about your broken finger. You don't get to do rough play. It's not an excuse. And it's like, how do I not go too far? I don't go too far. I don't let myself. And if I wasn't capable of keeping myself in check, I don't have a right to do rough play. It's not fair to anyone I'm playing with, and it's not the right call. It's not. And I would find it worrisome if someone is trying to engage in rough play and they're like, I can't help it. I went too far. I don't know what happened. I was in an animalistic headspace. No rough play for you, buddy. Back off until you are able to control yourself.
And that goes for a lot of other areas for kink as well. You have to be able to bring yourself out of it. And if we're talking about like subspace, obviously that could be difficult to just force yourself out of, but there has to be some tool available for either not losing yourself to the point where you can't stop or that you can no longer communicate in any way, because that's how you keep yourself safe and that's how you keep your partner safe.
I mean, tool is such a vague, nebulous thing. Like, what does that mean? And it's so hard. It's not like a tangible thing you can hand to someone. Here's the tool. But I cannot stress enough. I believe this 150%. If you're not able to stay in control, if you lose yourself, if you go too far, if you can't read your partner, if accidents happen, you don't have a right to be playing with others until you get that in check. And it's when we're born as kids, we're just little ego monsters. We want the food, we want the toys, we have to learn to share. We can't control ourselves. But part of raising a child to be an adult is to give them the building blocks and the tools to learn to control themselves. And if you're finding yourself entering the kinky lifestyle and you don't have those tools to control yourself and you can't read people and you're going too far and you're pushing people and you're having miscommunications and you're having injuries, you don't have a right to be playing with others until you master that. And only you can master it. People can sit around and talk to you and say, hey, this isn't working, but you have to be willing to make that choice internally. And it's a tricky one. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is possible. Others around you can do it. And using the excuse of I've gotten locked into a headspace and that's why I've pushed you too far is a lousy excuse. And it does not make you an appealing play partner.
Yeah, and it's just something to keep in mind because, again, I think from the outside looking in, I think people get that misconception that you just get to go full ham into it and you don't have to have any
Nope.
breaks on the train.
Nope.
The breaks are always there.
No. Always there. That's one of the core things I teach in my class is there's actually so much structure with, and people are like, oh, but I'm doing primal play because I don't want structure. Hey, I also don't want structure. Primal play works for me, but I'm putting a lot of foresight and effort. If I'm wrestling with someone, I'm looking at where their limbs are going. I'm looking where their head is. I'm paying attention to their breathing. What are their eyes like? The whole time I'm paying attention to it. And if I were to chuck that out and just be like, oh, I can go hog wild. No, you're opening yourself up for an accident. And you also don't want to get that reputation. No one's going to want to play with you if you aren't in control of yourself.
It's maybe less of a no structure thing as it is a different structure, a different way of
Exactly.
Yeah. So, in terms of primal play, was there any other areas that you wanted to mention or talk about before we wrap up today?
Well, we've been focusing a lot about wrestling when it comes to primal play. And in my mind, primal play is a lot more than just wrestling. One of the best things that I like about primal play, in my mind, primal play doesn't require tools. You don't need a tool bag to do primal play. All you need is your mind, your imagination, and your hands. And that's your tool bag right there. I like a lot of rough and primal play that isn't necessarily wrestling, but is slapping or punching or water play. I really like doing coming in from behind, doing a choke on someone, pulling their arms. You have to make sure, of course, they don't have a shoulder injury, pulling their arms. Fun primal play like taking someone from behind and marching them into a bedroom and bending them over a bed and shoving a pillowcase over their head and punching their butt is a total primal play scene that doesn't involve any wrestling. Anyone, no matter what your cardio state or your physical state, you don't have to have any wrestling experience to do play like that. I actually find primal play to be quite versatile, and there's so much possibilities. And if people are listening to this and their takeaway is that primal play is all wrestling based, it's certainly not. It's just a more free flowing kind of organic, tool free. I've showed up. I'm a pervert. Let's get it on and see what happens. And that's the appeal for me.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this largely in a play focused sense, and I know you've touched on that, like the hyper structured DS thing is not really your jam. Is there a way to build this into a relationship dynamic though, even if it's not necessarily like maybe in the same way you would with like a formalized like MS type relationship? Like, I guess have this be sort of like an everyday thing.
Yeah, drive by butt punching. It's whatever works for you and your dynamic. I like to do a lot of rough play. Here's a really simple one. I like being in a relationship. My daddy will when we're out in public, it's very discreet. No one can see. He'll pinch me. And the pinch can be quite vicious. And it's just this little endorphin, adrenaline kind of wake up. Like we could be in a store and we've just done a scene, and the scene took all of 2 seconds and no one else knew. It just happened between the two of us. I'm sitting there minding my own business. He walks by, viciously pinches me. I could end up with a bruise. There's your rough primal play scene. It just happened in the middle of Target while we were getting dish soap. So it's whatever works for you with your structure. And you could say, oh, well, that could fall under BDSM. In my mind, the primal play, it comes without tools and implements. And it can be as long or short as it needs to be. He can do something where he just walks by and, throws me up against a wall. carefully because he knows how he's doing it, and punches my ass a couple times and walks away. Bammo, there was your scene. That took all of 15 seconds. Now he's walking away and I'm in this, endorphin, like adrenaline space. Scenes don't need to be super long and complex. You can pinch someone and give them a couple punches multiple times in the course of the day if that's your dynamic for your relationship. It all comes down to what works for you and your partner. And as I'd mentioned before, you need to sit down and get to know yourself. You need to do the homework of figuring out how you tick, because the better idea you have of your wants and needs, the better the chance you're going to have of communicating it with others. And if you can communicate it with others, the better chance you have of getting those needs fulfilled. So I've taken the time to figure out what works for me. I'm able to clearly communicate that with the people around me, and I have a much higher chance of getting those needs fulfilled on a regular basis. There's certainly a lot of rough and primal play in my day-to-day life and not as much formal DS stuff. But there's a huge buffet. Kink is an endless buffet, and you can pick whatever flavors and treats and stuff that you want, and the things that you don't want, leave on the buffet. It's not for you, but it's for someone else.
This is maybe a good place to stop the conversation. I feel like we could probably talk for another 2 hours probably. Thank you so much for being here and for contributing your thoughts. And I know that at the beginning, you did kind of give a little bit of a shout out to some places where people can find you. Do you mind just kind of repeating that for everybody at the end here in case they do want to reach out or maybe see what classes you're teaching?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. My name is Rain DeGrey. I have the Dirty Talk podcast and I have the Dirty Talk advice column. I am always taking questions for the advice column. It's a bi-monthly advice column. If you have a question you want answered, it could appear on my website, which is raindegrey.com. I have a contact form on the website. My email is rain@raindegrey.com. I have a Patreon at Rain DeGrey, and I can also be found on FetLife, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you like what I'm doing, if you want to support me, if you want early access to the podcast and the advice column, support me on Patreon. And all of the classes that I am currently teaching are listed on my calendar on my website. And I also teach at a fair amount of conventions. I am doing Kinky College in Chicago next month. I'm doing Kink Fest after that. I just did Winter Wickedness in Ohio a couple weeks ago. So if you're not local to the San Francisco Bay Area, check out my calendar. I just might be coming to a city near you.
Okay, great. Again, thank you so much for being on here. And if anybody does have questions, please be sure to check those things out. If people have questions for me, of course, they can leave them in the comment section of this video, or you can reach out to me on my social media. And thank you guys again so much for being here. And until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.